Welcome to this video tutorial with Virtual Racing School for the Blancpain series on iRacing. This week we visit Phillip Island Circuit, where I'll be looking at a lap driven by Rens Broekman in the Ferrari 488 GT3, which is driven in the fault afternoon weather to match the official series. I'll play the lap in full view first before then going into further analysis. Okay, so that was a 1 minute 28.986. Okay then, so from the list of data packs, we are going to choose the Ferrari GT3 Blancpain Sprint Series data pack, and we're going to go down to week 6. This will load up the session details for Rens' session, where of course you can download the lap files to compare your driving in sim, the replay, and the race setup. So I'm going to click on Learn Track. It will start to play the lap through. I will pause it. And to give you an overview of what we're seeing, you've got a steering angle input trace. You've got the speed of the car throughout each sector, brake and throttle inputs as well. You can see the throttle here is 100% and the brake is 0 throughout this sector. And then you've also got some live driving inputs as well. So I'm just going to slow this down to half speed and mute it and play it through. So obviously this is the run through towards turn 1, which is a very fast first corner without any real references. You've got these horizontal lines on the circuit, but you'll find that you don't actually need to start braking until really quite late. Now if you really do need a reference, there are these tyre barriers to the left, which sort of as you get close to, obviously they should be in your peripheral, you should be looking towards the apex. You can start to think about braking. Now in terms of car positioning, you want to open the corner up as much as possible, so get the car out onto the rumble strip here on entry and we'll play it through. It will go to the next sector where you can see Rens starts to brake. Now he starts braking shortly after he starts turning in, leaves in 6th gear, but he's not really braking to slow the car down much at all. It's really more about just loading up the front end and getting the most front grip so he can carry decent speed on entry. Now if you brake too aggressively, that will provoke the car into oversteer. So you really just want to brake super gently and just maintain that trail braking through, and it will just allow you to carry a bit more speed than otherwise you would if you were to coast. So he's down into 5th gear. This is his apex, I guess, just before this marshal post. Very long corner. Avoid hitting that curb. It's not a rumble strip at that point, so you can't really get away with hitting it without upsetting the car. So be aware of that. But you do want to be back on the throttle just as you pass that marshal post, because the corner does open out again through the exit, and you want to take advantage of that and carry as much speed as possible in towards turn 2. Now when you start braking for turn 2, again there's no real reference here unfortunately, but it's pretty much as soon as you finished turning right and you start to turn left into turn 2, that's when you want to think about braking. So you can brake a bit later here and take a later apex, or you can brake early and carry good speed. So Rens does a compromise of the two approaches there. He's almost at the edge of the circuit, but not quite, because it allows him to open up the corner ever so slightly. And he starts braking quite gently, slightly harder, and then starts to bleed off and really just, again, similar to turn 1, just holds a tiny little bit of brake pressure in there, balancing the car to keep the nose in whilst not overdoing it and getting oversteer. So really, really tricky this turn 2. So you can choose to either V-shape it by taking an early first apex, allowing the car to run out, slowing the car down and getting back on the power on a tightening line to then hit a second apex, or you can be slightly off the first apex like Rens is doing so here. And he's in third gear, just allows the car to run out ever so slightly, but it's important to keep slowing the car down. You can see that in the speed trace, that he's still slowing the car down, and he's probably right on the edge of grip as well. If you do find you're a little bit too fast into here, then just allow the car onto a wider line. The worst thing that you can do is try and force the car to maintain a tight line with too much speed, because you'll probably end up getting completely out of shape and possibly even spinning. So I'll play it through. Still slows the car down. Now, as soon as the car starts to retighten, Rens is able to pick up the throttle, which you can see here, straight to about 80%. And then hesitating because he doesn't want to overdo it, the track kind of falls away ever so slightly down the hill, so the car does go a little bit light through the exit here, and we're pretty much at the apex for him. So this is either the first or second apex depending on how you want to look at it, but either way you do need to hit this as an apex. So a little bit of oversteer there as he commits to full throttle, which we can see in the steering trace. If you commit too early, you might not get away with that, but fortunately Rens is able to get away with it. But he does have to use all of the road through the exit. As we can see here, he does actually just drop some wheels onto the grass, but because he's got the car completely straight, he actually gets away with it there. So just speed it up. You want to keep the car gradually over to the left again. Listen out for that rumble strip towards the braking into the hairpin. I'll just pause it now, just as Rens starts to brake, and slow it down again. And we've just passed the 150 marker, but we haven't yet reached the 100 marker. So I like to brake just after the 150, and that looks about where Rens has hit the brakes as well. So this is actually the hardest braking zone on the circuit, the slowest corner on the circuit as well. So you want to brake fairly firmly, but even here we can see that Rens only reaches about 60% brake pressure maximum, and the reason being is this car does have pretty good brakes, and you reach sort of the edge of lockup. Even though the car has ABS, it's best to not rely on that. It can actually reduce braking efficiency if you're overly reliant on the ABS. So you want a late turn in here, so Rens keeps the car nice and straight for some time, turns in quite late, continues to brake all the way into the apex, down into second gear, gets really close to this apex curb. You can get away with touching it, but it will allow you a more planted exit if you avoid it. And then here we can see again to about 80% on throttle at the apex, but then a bit of hesitation. We are of course traction limited at this speed, and you can anticipate some oversteer if you overcommit. And again we can see as Rens commits to full throttle, he does actually have to catch a little bit of oversteer, but again doesn't actually cost him any time. And then bring the car over to the right hand side. This is now approaching turn 6. There's a few sort of minor kinks which are classed as corners at this circuit. Now Rens will have started braking just as the curb on the right hand side ends, and this is quite a tricky corner again, a very late apex, so I wouldn't recommend that you double apex this. You just take a wide entry and a late apex. You want a good exit. You have a period of high speed full throttle after this, so you want to really get the exit nailed. And we can see here again, Rens is not coasting, doesn't want to understeer, so he's just continuing to trail brake all the way into that apex, and then picks up the throttle just as he does eventually apex. And you'll find that the corner is actually quite banked here in the middle. It's quite cambered in towards the apex, so you'll see again Rens is really quite patient with the throttle because the circuit opens out and you can get some oversteer as the circuit starts to flatten through the exit. So just be aware of that and be patient. You want a nice, clean, neat and tidy exit. So through in towards turn 8 now, get onto that rumble strip on entry and then get close to this apex curb, which is not a rumble strip, so don't make contact with it. Ideally you can get away with it as long as the car is nice and straight. Still full throttle through here. And then similar in entry to turn 2 in that there isn't really a braking point here, unfortunately. The key thing really is to not brake too late. It's okay to start braking too early. As long as you're braking super gently, you won't actually lose too much time in doing so. So we can see here Rens starts braking quite early, only about 20% or so, and then is really just feeling the grip of the car. He's listening to the tyres, trying to make sure that he's on the edge of adhesion but not overdoing it, so making sure that he's getting that scrub sound from the tyres, keeping the car in tight up the hill on that rumble strip on the inside, and then as it changes into a curb, you want to be picking up the throttle ideally. It really just depends on how you approach it. Obviously here Rens was quite tight on approach, so he's minimised the distance through the corner, but you'll see here as he goes over the top of the hill, he does have to feather the throttle for quite a prolonged period in order to not run too wide. So that's really quite key here, that you don't run too wide because it will compromise your entry into braking for turn 10. So we'll just play it through. You can see here it does start to wash out a little bit, but because he's feathering that throttle, he minimises that. And then he's hard onto the brakes down the hill just before the 50-metre marker there. And you'll notice on initial braking application he's quite gentle on the brakes, and the reason being is the circuit has just crested. He's just going down the hill now, so the car is actually quite light, and the car will gain more grip as it compresses down towards the bottom of the hill, down towards the bottom of the corner. And you can see that in Rens's brake trace, that he increases that brake pressure before then trailing off again as he turns in. So we're in second gear. You want a nice tight apex, get the car onto the rumble strip on the inside, pick up the throttle nice and early, and if you've got your line right and you've slowed the car down enough at the apex, you should be able to keep the car over to the right through the exit, which will open up the next left-hander of turn 11. Now again, another very tricky section, but you don't need to brake from here on out for the remainder of the lap, but you do need good throttle control and a good sense for how close to the edge of grip you are with the car. So you can see here as he brings it into the apex here, he's just off the throttle, then back on again, and is feathering, waiting for the car to sort of show him that there's enough grip that he can commit to full throttle. He does have to correct for a little bit of oversteer there, but again gets away with it, and now he's committed because he knows that he can remain at full throttle without running wide through the exits, and then stay on that rumble strip for some time before you turn in for the last corner. You want the widest possible approach into here, take an early lift and then get back on the power nice and early. You should have shaved off enough speed with that lift to then remain committed through the exit ideally. Now we can see here that Rens doesn't quite have the confidence. He's sensing that the speed of the car is just maybe a little bit too high, and he's continuing to feather the throttle ever so slightly. Now this slight decrease in throttle pressure isn't really going to hurt the exit speed, and he's probably minimized the damage there because he's not run wide, and that's far more important really. So if you do need to lift, it's much better to do so and avoid running wide onto the grass, and it's better to do so earlier rather than later. And there we are across the line, completing the lap. You can find all setups, replays and telemetry for your own use and analysis on virtualracingschool.com, where you can also book coaching including group classes with world champions from the likes of Koana Simsport. Good luck for this week and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.